Welcome, humans and future sentient silicon beings, to the fourth age with Noah and Marty. Today we have Sophie Thompson, co-founder of VirtualSpeech. It's so good to have you here. Could you introduce yourself and VirtualSpeech?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm Sophie Thompson. I'm co-founder and CEO of VirtualSpeech, and we use virtual reality and AI to improve learning. So that's right from higher education through to adult learning, like in corporate training, for example.
It's super cool. The part I saw, I guess, put you in front of a room of people in VR, and I'm guessing you've got to give a speech, and it sort of acclimates you to the idea that you're going to do this in front of a bunch of people. Do I have that right?
Yeah, you've summarised it really well there. So basically we have a platform with about 30 courses at the moment that all focus on so-called soft skills, or I like to call them like power skills, or more like human intelligence now. And each one of those blends e-learning with practice and active learning in virtual reality. So one of our most popular courses is public speaking. So then you would put on a VR headset and you would be immersed in front of audiences of different sizes, and it evokes a similar emotional reaction to if you were presenting in front of the real world. So it can bridge that gap really between like practicing in front of the mirror and doing the real thing.
What platform is it on?
So we built it on Unity, but the online courses are just available on our website, and then it's integrated with the VR side.
Like on Oculus, or what do they call it now? MetaQuest?
Yeah, so we're available on Quest, Pico, HTC, soon to be Lenovo as well. Yeah.
That's awesome. I was curious if, obviously we're all about AI, and one of the first thoughts I had, it'd be really interesting if you could have characters with more. I haven't tried the program yet, but it seems like a perfect natural fit to have AI, have characters that are aggressive or softball or whatever, and then different scenes, depositions, things that make people's heart race.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, one of the custom environments we've done is a deposition environment for a law school, so that they can practice that. And then now that we've integrated AI, obviously, it can like effectively talk back to you. So it's much more realistic than pre-Gen AI, where it had to be preloaded in, or it was branch learning scenarios, and it just wasn't as interactive.
What does that look like? Like, what's this? One of the challenges I've run into with some of the AI response times is they take about 2 to 3 seconds, and it kind of takes you out. Now, I think it's not too far out, but I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of the quality of the responses as well as the naturalness and the speed of it.
I don't notice, to be honest, the delay, probably because I've used it so much that I'm used to it now.
Not used to the delay.
Yeah, so for us as well, it's got that extra layer because it has to go through speech to text and then OpenAI and then back out again, text to speech, and then through the VR system. So you would think it was a very long time. And the first iteration of it, it was maybe like 3 seconds. Now it's less than 2 seconds, which can actually have its benefits as well, because when it's in a training setting, sometimes people need that time to think. So if you're practicing something like a difficult conversation, and the avatar responds to you in a way that you're not prepared for, you'd actually quite like those moments to think. We do have 2 different variations of those role play exercises. One is where you manually click to basically tell the software you've stopped speaking. Otherwise, it will listen out for you basically until you stop speaking, and then there's a slightly longer delay. But then some people prefer not to click when they've stopped speaking because that feels more natural. But then that does have a slightly longer delay.
Oh, that's really cool. I wonder too if the delay helps, at least for me, around mindfulness, especially if I were to go into a stressful situation, help calm me down.
Yeah, it does feel very realistic. Like when I'm doing demos and stuff, and I'm speaking to the avatar, it's not like anybody's ever like, is it frozen? So like you easily get used to it, and it does still feel very natural. And mainly because of the responses the avatars have as well. So even if there's a slight delay, some people just don't react that quickly to conversations anyway.
Right.
So for public speaking, do you have an audience reaction as well? And if you do, what sorts of ranges would you have on something like that?
So there's a few ways in which the audience can interact. The first would be, for example, if you've just delivered a presentation the audience can now, well, effectively listen to exactly what you've said, and now they can ask you questions on what you've said. So the avatars will put up their hands, you hover over the avatar, and then they'll ask you a question on your specific topic. So that was a really good addition. But also they'll do things like, if you're speaking too quietly, they might start to like whisper to each other, and basically they just get distracted because they're not engaged. In some of the role play scenarios, we've recently added avatar emotions to them. So if you make them angry, they'll do various things. They'll start off frowning, but if they get really angry, they'll bang the table, which I haven't actually managed to...
Virtual tomatoes to throw at the speaker?
No, because I mean, we have actually had that request a few times. And the reason we haven't put it in, well, not yet anyway, is because we built the platform to improve competence, but confidence as well, because there's no point like knowing how to deliver a great sales pitch or knowing how to present theoretically if you haven't got the confidence to actually do those things. So we thought things like tomatoes or just heckling people would probably not help with the confidence side of things.
Well, I mean, there's a certain confidence that comes out of meeting challenges. There's a famous story about one of the more successful comedians, Bill Burr, if you're familiar with him. One of his sort of seminal events in his career was some set in, I believe it was Philadelphia, where the crowd was just absolutely awful, and was sort of booing and jeering sort of everybody. And so he went out and did a just viral rant on the crowd in the city of Philadelphia, and their parents and ancestors and gods and everything, and that went viral and is still like the top of his resume. He's a multi-millionaire, and he does stadiums, and that's the thing that people remember about him was just going out off the top of his head and just blasting a theater full of people. So having that kind of safe space where you could simultaneously work out those sorts of things, I mean, the gyms have heavy bags, and it's useful for people to be able to practice and get frustrations out. I think there's be some kind of overlap there as well.
Yeah, I mean, some people might use it as like fuel to their fire. What we would have instead is that we do have feedback metrics as well. So everybody gets feedback on, say, their use of eye contact, their use of hesitation words, how many ums and ahs they've said, listenability, pace, volume, tone, those kinds of things. So that is where, if they hadn't done so well, they would be able to see those scores. So it's a slightly more passive way of telling them where they need to improve.
So you track eye movements?
Yes, so we track their eye
Awesome.
movements as well, so that we can see where they're looking at. Well, they can see where they're looking at in the audience. Again, like if people are nervous, it's very common that people will just stare at the back of the room, for example. But actually, things like presenting, it's all about your audience. It's not about you. And if you aren't looking at anyone in your audience, you're not engaging with any of them. I should actually add just one note in terms of the feedback, is that we have also trained the avatars that they will give you feedback based on certain like rubrics and methodologies. So
that's really cool.
For example, for something like job interview practice, you can practice with one of the avatars, and they will come up with like an ideal response, like an AI suggested response. So if the avatar asks you, why did you apply for this job? And if you replied saying, I just applied for 100 jobs and here I am.
Yeah.
That's obviously not the
That's
best
not
answer.
so good.
Yeah. So it will give you it won't just give you feedback saying, you should try better. It will say like, this is what you could have said. And it will say like, I've worked for 5 years here. I have this experience. And then they can practice that ideal answer. They'll also get feedback on particular methods like the STAR technique or the CAR method. So that if they haven't, for example, used examples or shown evidence of where they've shown that skill. So it can be a really useful tool to have that personalised feedback as well, so that for example, a job interview, it's not generic feedback. And in all honesty, is the pace in which you're speaking that important in a job interview? Maybe not. The content is more important, what you're saying.
I really like one of the potentials that this could have in this AI revolution world that we might be in, which is humans needing to potentially move jobs in mass. So a lot of whatever they had before is going away. So voiceover work and maybe driving and truckers and all this, and getting over to a new world. This seems like it'd be really helpful for them to learn those new skills and to get comfortable
Yeah.
to deliver those skills.
Yeah, I mean, the irony isn't lost that we're using artificial intelligence to help improve human intelligence.
Right.
But I think, I mean, we've been around since 2015, and since then we've always had this idea that in an increasingly automated world, and especially over the last year, it's those skills that make us uniquely human that will become increasingly important in the workplace.
And that's a theme we've seen with other areas that with chess, no, I think it was chess where, so 1997, human gets beaten by AI and it just keeps getting worse from there. And then at some point people realized, wait, the AI's got some really weird strategies. We should adopt those. So it really got to the point where.
Yeah. Some changes were made in how chess AIs were developed that started causing the chess AIs to play in ways that meant that humans could learn from the AIs. And one of my major hobby horses is, in fact, how do we use these technologies to integrate with ourselves? Because at the end of the day, we don't really care about people that aren't us. So making the world better for our machines isn't really like what gets us out of bed in the morning. And so finding ways to access super intelligence to me is somewhat like the mechanical problem of finding ways to access super speed or super strength. You have a car and now suddenly you can carry a lot more, a lot further, a lot faster. Or trains do the same thing, cranes and so on. So almost everybody, certainly everyone who listens to this, is going to be within arm's reach of a computer. But how do you use that capacity to actually change your day-to-day life in ways that make it better? Pulling back from my previous sort of struggle thing, if the AIs are sort of capable of coming up with better responses for you, are you thinking in any direction of like a introvert interface system where you could simply have the, sort of train up an AI avatar to do your socializing for you as an introvert, so you don't have to deal with that stuff, and it can give the better responses. We could sort of completely wipe extroverts out of the system. I mean, this is obviously a big win for everybody. All the like gift of gab stuff, we could just be using AIs to do that and then deliver us like the stuff we actually care about.
I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, we're focused on like professional skills, so we don't have as much of that like social skills in there. And I mean, I guess I'm coming at this more from like a VR point of view.
Right. I'm thinking the professional end of those things. I mean, I don't think I'd want to go. Are you familiar with the Asimov book, The Naked Sun, where there's this planet that has a population of, I think it's 10,000, and they only interact with each other through holographic screens, and they're also incredibly misanthropic. They can't stand the concept of being the physical presence of another person. Like that's not a desirable endpoint. But on the other hand, something like 40% of the population are introverts. A lot of them bitterly complain about the amount of rigmarole that's involved in the business professional worlds. What if instead of having to train people, we can just replace it wholeheartedly? I don't know really. I mean, we do things where you can help people like network or do small talk
that kind of thing, which, I mean, everybody just does to fill time, really. It's just a polite thing to do. But I think, yeah, as introverts, you're less likely to want to do it. But a lot of what we do is also focused around people with anxiety, for example. So some introverts would fall into that bucket. And that's where a lot of the building confidence comes from. So it's not just about the skills, it's the confidence to speak up in meetings if you're somewhat inclined to not speak up, for example.
I was going to say, I think in some professions you need far more confidence than you do competence.
Yeah, fake it till you make it is some people's attitudes.
Yeah, I had a lawyer explain to me, it doesn't matter how much you know, you just got to look confident in front of the jury. I'd love to know more about what you've learned in this whole flow with just the flow of teaching humans. And you said you started in 2019?
2015.
2015. Okay, so you really saw the AI transition. Like 2015 for me was, neural nets kind of work. We can't figure out what to do when they break, and there were a bunch of other machine learning methodologies, but slowly, especially around 2019, that changed. And then, of course, about 2 years ago, that really changed. And I'm curious how your business has changed to adapt to really riding this wave of an AI revolution.
Yeah, so when we first started, just a bit of background actually. So we first started as the first virtual reality app to overcome the fear of public speaking. And that was because of our own fears of public speaking. And for me, I had severe social anxiety. So I wouldn't order my own food in a restaurant. I wouldn't go to a job interview. So when we're talking about introverts, I mean, I think I present quite well as an extrovert now, but I am an introvert. So that's why we started VirtualSpeech originally, just as some like nerdy fun to help ourselves.
Did it start as a horror game? I was just curious because that could be a really amazing horror. If you just swap it to suddenly the curtain opens up and you're in your underwear and
yeah, I was thinking of that as well. Both the joy of, say, being able to hold Wembley Stadium in the palm of your hand, and the absolute horror of being jeered by a room full of demons. You could do all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, it started off very basic. I wish I could say it started off as exciting as you both said, but it started off very basic with just like a few VR environments, and then we implemented which I guess you would kind of call more like traditional AI now, or maybe even old-fashioned AI.
Yeah, it really sounds. Machine learning is now sounding like oh, come on, that's old.
Yeah, I know. So we used to just have feedback on the delivery. So that's things like use of hesitation, words, pace, volume, tone, which, I mean, a couple of years ago, to be fair, sometimes now when we even talk to clients, they're like, wow, that's amazing. And I'm thinking, God, this has been, like, we've been doing this since 2015. Like, is it that revolutionary?
Yeah.
And then, obviously, in the last couple of years, we integrated generative AI, and that's where, just in terms of our whole product development, actually, we've come on leaps and bounds in the last 12 months since that point, because it just opened up a world of opportunities. So before we integrated Gen AI, our biggest request from customers was to be able to have free-flowing conversations rather than branch learning scenarios. And we were like, the tech just isn't there. That's not tech we build, but other people don't have it. And then when that big GPT launch,
it just becomes ubiquitous
we were like,
instantly, basically.
Yeah, we were just like, oh my gosh, this is what we've been waiting for. So we worked really hard and very quickly over 2 months to get that first iteration in back in, I think it was about this time last year, actually, end of January last year. And it started off as, what was the first thing? I can't remember what the first thing was now, but now we use it in so many different ways, and it is much more of a valuable learning tool now compared to a year ago. And even then it was valuable, but it just has a whole new dimension now.
Do you now use it for also assessing hesitation and other little human quirks, or is that your other system?
That's the other system. So we use it more for the feedback, the interactivity, the reactivity.
Okay. I was curious what your data set is, or is it more of a hand-tuned model? Or some in between?
I mean, in all honesty, I'm not the technical
Oh yeah, okay.
person out of the
I
founding
was just curious. Yeah,
team, so I'm more of the biz dev side
yeah.
of things. And it's my
Okay.
co-founder who I like to. Well, I like to say to people that he's like the Steve Wozniak and I'm the Steve Jobs. Like
Yeah. Okay.
he's
That has
he's
interesting
busy
connotations, but
coding
yeah.
away.
Now, where are you seeing it go from here? I mean, what I see is, yeah, there's ChatGPT that's exploding. I've been seeing well, Stable Diffusion, Dolly, and Midjourney, and a few other flavors for doing live deepfakes and that sort of thing. Is there what do you still see as a limitation that you think is about to be broken through?
Something in terms of our product that we can't quite do yet, but we want to be able to do is to generate the like virtual environments. So we've got pre-built environments at the moment, which ultimately will become familiar to people who use our service frequently.
Oh, I see.
And we've just added in things like each time they go in, like the picture on the wall will change,
Yeah,
or like
yeah.
little things like that.
Little tweaks, yeah.
Yeah, but it would be amazing if at some point we could reliably have the quality to generate an AI environment of like Wembley Stadium or like a certain conference room and so on. Whereas at the moment, it's
There
not
has
quite
been
there.
work going on for over a decade at this point, some of which is getting more advanced to do 3Dization of 2Dization. So this, I believe, the first really impressive work I saw was being done in art museums or for art museums to basically turn people's, like Twitter and Instagram photographs into full models. And so I think it was actually the Louvre where they had, and this was probably BS, but they basically had sort of this sort of papering of pictures and then morphing into a 3D model of the entire museum. And that sort of work is also been picked up and advanced for the 3D printing people to try to come up with better and easier ways. You see something, you're like, hey, it'd be great to be able to make that part. Have to go get a CAD. No, I'll take a couple pictures with my phone and drop it into a system. And so that's something that I know is in currently fertile research grounds, that you might be able to get some kind of system where even users could basically say, this is specifically the conference room at my office.
Yeah,
that I'm going to have to
yeah,
give
because
presentation. Here it is. Give me
because
this
at the moment
environment.
we can do that as a custom build. But like, imagine if you could just upload a picture and then they're in there. That would be amazing.
So you were talking a little bit about where it's going next and being able to generate new rooms. And I'm curious if we're only at the beginning of AI and who knows where it's going next, but if the next iteration is, well, it's hard to say what Sam Altman's what he's got back there, but he's talking currently about a march toward AGI. And I'm guessing, as a biz dev person, you're probably not focused on crazy, moonshot, but just on keeping the business together. But I'm curious about if we achieve AGI, there's something really interesting about what your product could do in terms of, I don't know, just 10 million things where now you can now interact with a thinking, breathing, or at least perceived to be thinking, breathing creature on the other end that appears to be human. And if you could then play out all sorts of scenarios, it seems like it would explode from there into not just corporate training, but I don't know, almost exploring relationships, exploring active listening techniques.
Yeah, like every facet of communication.
Everything a human would interact with.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, in the last 12 months, like the product has dramatically changed. And then I can't even imagine, say this time 12 months from now, let alone a couple of years away. And in terms of what that means for learning is that all of these things are so much more realistic. Like if you are a new manager and you need to have like a difficult conversation with someone, like a performance review, or God forbid if you have to fire someone, that's like, how do you practice those conversations? Because you don't know
Yeah,
how that person's going to react. You
yeah,
don't know how you'll then react to that.
right.
There's so many skills you have to have at play there. But if you could practice that an unlimited number of times
20
in,
scenarios of different
yeah,
flavors, different person in front of you.
yeah, then
Yeah,
you can go into that conversation more confident. But also, not just the manager, the person who's going into that performance review and perhaps knows something positive isn't coming. How can they hold their composure, or how can they ask the questions they want to ask as well?
right.
Well, that actually gets directly into the potential for social reinforcement learning. So if you have a functional scenario situation, uh, then the when we were talking about chess, the breakthrough was reinforcement learning. This concept that instead of trying to look at the entire game tree and figure out which part of it was the best, they trained up an AI to sense essentially which parts of the game tree, based on its current board position, were better. And they did that by basically large numbers of random iterations, with sort of back checking and training up an AI. So if you generate reasonable, specific social interactions around important, things like hiring, firing, public speaking, comedy. In theory, you would have the pieces at that point to start doing reinforcement learning and building a super comedian, or a super, layoff expert, or
Ugh. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
didn't George Clooney play one of those in a
Yeah,
movie once? Yeah.
he did. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but I was thinking that when you said it. I was like, who
Yes.
wants that job?
Right. Um, so are you, in terms of these kinds of next steps, um, are you pretty much bringing in customer input, and if five people ask for something that sounds both valuable and doable, then you do that? Or do you have like some internal team? Do you stare at a wall at 5 minutes every day and try to imagine the future, or some kind of round table of other AI VR business people to try to figure out where the future's going? Or uh,
Um,
what?
Do you have
Yeah.
moonshot time, or yeah,
Right. Yeah.
20% time?
Yeah. Like where is your head at in terms of guidance or exploitation of these things?
yeah, so a lot of what we do is very much fueled by our customers, our customer feedback, what they think is missing from their learning, or what can make that more engaging, what can make that more effective. So we heavily rely on our users' feedback. Every month we have an updates video with new product features in, which are mostly based off what our customers have requested. But then I would also add that our product team are excellent in terms of being visionaries. So my co-founder Dom is, ever since, I mean, I've known him for about 10 years now, and ever since I've known him, he's always had a real eye for like innovation and the future. And he just, there's some people who just think in that way, like he's that person. So he's the perfect person to drive that team. And yeah, he's surrounded by people on that team who think the same and think about, well, what is possible? Let's give it a go. It doesn't have to be perfect, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We'll just can it. But let's give it a go, see how we can push the limits, and then when something new comes out, let's see how we can push those limits and how we can adapt that to education.
One of the things that we've run into a number of times is that AI. I love the potential for AI to be able to give us individualized education as opposed to school, which I think of as scaled education. That you've got 20 kids in the room, you've got to be able to meet each one and you basically have to average yourself out, whereas AI could potentially land exactly where that person is at that very moment and help them out. I know for me, I've been learning French for 3 years, but I've really gotten to a spot where I think I've got to go and immerse myself somehow to go further. And I'm thinking about this sort of thing as a way for me to, put on the VR headset 30 minutes a day and just be, I've got to speak French and I've got to interact with them. And so I'm loving this as that interface that I think is missing, where ChatGPT is great, but it's text-based. It needs to take that leap to feel human.
Yeah.
And why not in VR?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, we have this was something we hadn't actually planned for when we released generative AI integrations, and one of those things that we've been able to do in the last year is offer the role plays in different languages.
Oh, that's cool.
So we're now available in 6 languages, French being one of them.
Oh, so you have this.
Yeah. So
Okay.
we just did that so that we could be applicable to a wider market and more global organisations. But we started getting feedback from customers who were using it for language practice, because we have about 30 off-the-shelf like role play topics, which are your more like serious things like sales, performance reviews, and so on. But then there is also free-flowing conversation, and there's the ability to upload your own custom prompts. So people are basically saying, I'm practicing this language, blah, 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 and then they can talk for 30 minutes in French.
Oh, that's really cool.
Have
There
this
is
conversation.
What we're saying.
There's some potentially even more interesting things. I cannot remember what the anagram for this is, but it's being explored in Thailand, and it's early stages, but working quite well so far. And these people were basically studying expats and picking up languages and trying to figure out why kids basically learn languages without accents, and adults, if they learn the language at all, have heavy accents, and decided that it's because children watch fluent language users having conversations, and that's actually how the human brain learns to associate meanings with things, and that in fact the way to acquire accent-free fluent language is to not attempt to speak it at all, but to actively listen and engage in active listening to real conversations between fluent language speakers, and sort of drench your brain in that experience, and then your brain will be like, oh, shang means handshake or whatever, because that's just what it means. And so if this actually is real, and like I said, the article I read was from a few years ago and apparently was working well, so I don't know what sorts of studies and other things exist, but if you have a VR environment with avatars capable of reasonably recognizably human behavior actions, then you would be able to create these scenarios without having to, jerk some people out of their regular lives to go pretend to order coffee in front of somebody so that they could learn how to speak French.
Yeah, exactly. You should give it a go, Marty.
Yeah, I'm going to take a look at this right after this. I was curious about too. I haven't tried it myself, but MetaQuest 3 now has a what do they call it? It's not AR, but it's mixed reality, some flavor of. Do you guys use that feature?
Not yet, but we are developing for I think they call it like mixed reality pass through. So they've got color pass through now, so that when you put on the headset, obviously years ago you used to not be able to see through the headset at all, and then you could see in black and white. Now you can see in color. And now you have the functionality to add in what is traditionally called augmented reality, but they like to phrase it as mixed reality, and if you're speaking to Apple it would be spatial computing. So
right
but yeah, we are developing that at the moment. So for example, you could be sitting in your own office, and then ultimately one of our avatars could then appear opposite you on the desk in your own environment, and have that role play conversation with you, or you can present to them. So yeah, that's very exciting. And yeah,
Practice
definitely
my
on the
French
roadmap.
right here. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need to
Yeah.
go into one of our rooms.
Yeah, well, it's too bad that AR, like proper AR, has really is still in the world of what's the word? Never coming out. Why can't I think of the term? um, AI was always like that, and then suddenly it jumped. But I've been waiting for AR to actually get there. I was hoping that Vision Pro would do that, but at $3,500, it's pretty inaccessible. But
Yeah.
for corporate training, that might be great.
Yeah, and also with the Vision Pro, like if we wait until like the fourth, fifth generation, then I think that's when AR will really have its moment.
Right, right. Are you? I'm curious. Have you played with the Vision Pro? I haven't had a chance.
No, I haven't yet. So
Okay.
I'm in the UK as well, so we haven't got it yet.
Oh,
But
okay. We don't really have it
yeah,
here either. At least I haven't seen the ability yet.
pre-orders opened I think on Friday.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know if anybody has actually got it in their hands yet, but yeah, we didn't have pre-orders yet.
Right, right.
But to be honest, even when we do, for that price point, and given that our customers probably aren't going to be using it, it's probably not worth the investment
Yeah, I don't
immediately
know.
anyway.
I mean, for a company, that's not a big price. Like if you could train up your, CEO on media training and get them in front of a camera on, CNN
Yeah.
and get them
You
comfortable with
say,
it.
yeah, you say that though, but I mean with Quest, like even Quest 2 where it was 399, there was still a lot of pushback in terms of
Really?
the hardware at that price. Yeah.
Huh.
And I think that's something that, so when we first started, we always developed for like standalone headsets. And at first that meant it was on your mobile phone and you would slot it into like a plastic one. And other people were developing for say like Oculus Rift,
Right.
which was tethered. But we always
Right.
believed that's not going to work in businesses. But we also found that speaking to businesses, they would no way try a new technology if it was at that price point. So I think you have use cases where there's a headset called Vario, which is a similar price point. I think it's definitely like on the higher end, and I think that's more used in like defence force and that kind of thing because it's more that it has. I don't know if that one does in particular, but I know that a hesitation with the defence force and VR headsets is being able to use them entirely offline, for example. So I think that's where people can get a higher price point is if they have those features like that. Whereas Apple Vision Pro, for example, with the graphics and stuff, I personally don't think that's enough at the moment to
Yeah.
entice enterprise into that price point.
And also, I wonder if they've solved one of the other problems I've always run into with AR, which is one is the hardware of getting little pixels floating in front of your eyes, but then which is really 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 hard. But then I felt like just even identifying this is a wall and putting something on the wall and having it stay on the wall, or knowing this is a table, that problem I'm not sure if that's solved yet. Maybe AR is going to jump us ahead, but go back 2 or 3 years ago, it was nowhere near.
Yeah, well, funnily you should say that actually about the table because we've done like a concept video of what our MR offering will look like, and me not being technical myself, I was talking to the product team and they were like, that's a concept video, and I was like, yeah, but like how long would it take? And then that's when they started telling me about things like that.
Yeah.
They were like, well, one of the problems is at the moment it like will recognize it's a table, but then the avatar won't sit down, so it's just like standing by the table because it hasn't recognized it was a table. And I was like, this is
Yeah.
much more complex than
Right.
I imagined.
Well,
It's one of those spots
reminded-
where. Go ahead, no.
I'm reminded one of the most technically impressive pieces of filmmaking in human history to this day is the scene in The Incredibles where Mr. Incredible hands his old suit to the designer and she takes it and then puts her hand inside the suit and there's a tear in the suit and her hand goes through the tear in the suit. And that was in a single shot, and that was like absolutely perfectly impossible, like for every single reason imaginable. Like it's the first time in human history a virtual character handed an object to another virtual character who took possession of it.
Oh, wow.
It's the only tear in a model that had ever existed up to that point. It's the only time a model ever interacted with another model like through that. That's not how any of those things would typically work. And it looks fine. I mean, it's you watch it on screen and you're like, okay, that just happened. It doesn't, you don't care about it. It's not like, the director suddenly sweeps the camera around and focuses in and is like, hey, audience, this cost millions of dollars,
And
and
this is revolutionary.
geniuses, yeah, geniuses worked on it for a year to be able to make this happen. But yeah,
I need to watch that again now to get that full appreciation for
right.
everything that went into that one clip.
But yeah, figuring out how to get objects in space to interact with each other as objects in space basically needs a complete physical model. And that physical model has to be something that you can compute fast enough to cope with whatever's going on, and it has to be accurate enough to reality to evolve the same way reality is going to. And we haven't solved either of those problems yet. Like, we don't.
No.
Physics is well advanced, but we don't actually know how to do that.
One day, who knows?
I'm just looking through my history. You said 2015. Was the Oculus Rift CV1 out at that point? What did you first develop on?
So we released onto the mobile app stores, and the Samsung Gear VR was in our first pictures, which are just our friends taking pictures of us with a headset on. That's the Gear VR.
But yeah, you
That's
had
cool.
those foldable cardboard things where you stick your phone in it and it shows one after each of your eyes. Yes.
Yeah, and even in fact, if you go on our YouTube and scroll way back, these videos are probably still there where our promo videos have the two screens because that's how it appeared on your phone. So now if you film inside VR, obviously you don't have the two screens. But I remember at first being like, why is it two screens? It's well, because that's just how it looks on your phone, and it's not till it's on your face that it changes to one. So yeah, it was things like Google Cardboard, but yeah, Gear VR was our biggest one at that point. And then there were things like Google Daydream, those kinds of back in the day headsets.
Yeah, it's crazy how far it's come back. I remember seeing the Cardboard and thinking that was oddly brilliant and cheap, but today it just seems so antiquated.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean,
Well,
even
again,
if you
can't
think
beat
of
the price point, right?
Oh, the price point was pretty dang good.
yeah, but even now, in the XR world or tech world, people talk about 3 degrees of freedom and 6 degrees of freedom, and actually, most of the time, customers don't care about those nitty gritty things.
Or they don't know about it, right? I mean, because
Yeah.
the CV, I can't remember, one of those early models you could rotate, but you couldn't move. You couldn't translate. And I think that was true of the Cardboard models.
Yeah, so they were all 3 degrees of freedom, and Pico still have a headset actually. I think that's 3, the G24K, I think it is. But most of them are now 6 degrees of freedom. But from a consumer point of view, people don't tend to know because, I mean, especially in education, for what we do, a lot of it is professional skills. So you're sitting at a desk or presenting on a stage, so you don't actually. Lots of people naturally don't move around in that environment, even though they can do. Very few of our customers actually do move in those environments.
I'm really curious. So you were saying that you don't notice the pauses. There was an example someone put together of, the toy, the Furby. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
Yes, I remember having one for Christmas when I was younger.
Yeah, okay. So we keep referring to that because of the really interesting aspect that it doesn't take much to fool a human, right? But somebody did the experiment I wanted to do. They took a Furby and they actually put ChatGPT behind it or some flavor of that. But it didn't have that realism because it did do the pause. And this one was a little more extreme. It was like 4 seconds, and then it said, please wait, and then another 3 seconds. And I was curious about, you were saying you don't notice the pause. Do you know what the actual pause is between asking a question or saying something and then a response? Is it about a second, 2 seconds?
Yeah, I think it's 2 seconds at the moment.
Okay, that's getting really good. Because my thought is the moment it gets to the point where it's actually 0, or how there's an overlap that we always have. You always, someone starts talking on the last word or something. Then I wonder if we'll be truly there where we wouldn't be able to differentiate, except maybe by the look, but we wouldn't be able to differentiate that this thing on the other side is not a real living, breathing thing.
I think there's something else with the delay is that it might start off at, say, 2 seconds. But if you have a really long conversation, it's effectively scanning everything before it gives you that next answer. So
Oh, is it? Okay.
So what with our software it is anyway. I don't know if technically that's how it is all the time. So for example, if you had a 10-minute conversation, it would like stay at about that. But if you practiced your French for half an hour, for example, by the time you got to the end of that half an hour, that might more be like 3 or 4 seconds. And again, it's not a huge amount of time, but again, it's just something with the technology that like it will change very quickly, as things have changed quickly already, and it will be something. I mean, like when we're talking about the Gear VR now, we'll look back and be like, oh, do you remember when you had to wait 2 seconds for it to reply?
Right, and it used machine learning.
There was a study back in the 70s that I want to say IBM did on delay. So they were bringing out their next generation of mainframe, and so they wanted to figure out, because mainframes were all time shared, so delay was actually part of just using your computer in those days. And so they basically plugged the entire mainframe into one terminal, if you can imagine such a thing, a terminal that had one computer all to itself, and did a study to try to figure out what the highest useful speed was. And what they discovered is that there's no such thing as a highest useful speed. That even gradations of time delay that were below conscious human awareness over the course of skilled interaction by a user would turn into significant. It's not like a like 20 millisecond versus, or 20 microsecond or 20 millisecond versus 10 millisecond. A human being can't tell the difference, but and it's not at the end of an hour you've accumulated an entire second's extra worth of work. It's, even though the person can't tell a difference, it became an accumulative gain, and as high as they could turn up the knob, there was always a win, because people can type faster than they can, consciously think, and so on. And so there's this whole like change in how you chunk things. So I'd be curious, if you don't have it already, what it looks like as these new generations come in, and as you sort of examine these things, what happens if you cut these delays in half, or cut a few milliseconds off, and what happens to the user experiences.
I wonder if the difference between 2 seconds and 1 second, and then 1 second to 500 milliseconds is everything.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a handful of people who will say, oh, but the delay's a bit long. So like some people do notice it. So yeah, for them, if it was cut down, I think it would have to be less than a second for those people. I think there's people who are very picky on it, or they're not. And it partly depends on their use case as well. So they wanted it, for example, to mimic a phone call. So they weren't going to practice looking at an avatar. It would just be a phone. So then if you've not got anyone to look at, then 2 seconds does feel longer, because you haven't got those other like communication
cues and stuff. Oh, that's interesting too. You could hide a lot of that, huh? Hide that delay.
Yeah, with so even things like the
pause and think, and
and the avatars will like move with their body language, or at the moment it will say you hit reply, and then it says thinking ... for 2 seconds.
A little bit of something.
So there's something that will take away even like 20 milliseconds. Like it will take something away from that time.
Shadow it.
But it will be amazing when there is no delay, or people like me, I've just got used to it. So I'm not expecting it to be a conversation like you and me are having right now. I just think it's amazing. It's replying to me and remembering what I've said, and is asking me something I said 10 minutes ago. And that's where most people are at the moment, is they're just still fascinated that this can even happen. So
I mean, that's always good when the perception is like that people are amazed with the technology, because that was
actually what led to the IBM study, is that's basically where the existing users were. They didn't think that having a faster terminal would matter because everyone was just sort of amazed that you could even have a terminal and have machines working for you.
Right.
And so they were like, this new mainframe will be able to get results back in, minutes instead of hours. That's the delay people care about. People don't care about like whether or not you hit return and a new prompt pops up in a couple of seconds versus 10 or 15. And that's then they were like, oh wait, no. They care a lot about like instantaneous responses.
When something's a novelty, like in a way you do have more patience with it because you're so like, wow, it does that. But once you get used to it, there's like a certain curve wow, this is fascinating. But then when that's no longer like the new shiny thing, if it does take longer, so there's probably a level of patience that people have at the moment as well.
There's a Louis C.K. bit about being on an airplane and having them pilot Wi-Fi, and so now it's fairly common, but this was sort of first time for everybody. And it's like, okay, we're going to pilot Wi-Fi, and then halfway through, it breaks. And he said there was, almost a riot on the plane that this thing that they didn't know could even exist and was handed to them for nothing now wasn't available.
I think that is a very human thing. I used to, in management, I would teach people that if I surprise you with $200 at the end, or if I surprise you with $100 at the end of the week, that's a way better experience than telling you I'll give you 200 at the end of the week and then give you 100.
Yeah.
And the thing I keep thinking about is there's the people who complain about the experience. I'm just curious about just that weird visceral human element that we can't even detect that will light up the moment you guys, which I think is going to be soon, go from 2 seconds to 1 second. And I don't even think the goal is 0. I think the goal is -5 seconds, where I trail off and you're already starting the next thing. I wonder, you mentioned body language. Where is that info? Is that also coming from ChatGPT, or is that little other cues?
So the avatar's body language, we're just programming to like they basically are on a loop, if you like.
Yeah.
For certain words, they'll
Oh,
look
okay.
a certain way.
Trigger.
But we also measure the body language of the user, which is based on
How do you
tracking
get
the
that?
headset or
Okay.
tracking the controllers, or now you can track hands as well, tracking their hands. And eventually that will also be tracking facial expressions. That's not something we do at the moment.
Okay.
But in the future, it will be.
Do you do the
That
Amy
was-
Cuddy
yeah.
research, the stuff on how you hold your body and everything?
The Superman pose, yeah.
Yeah. This versus
Yeah,
this.
that's in
Yeah.
our body language course.
That's really cool. Awesome.
That's not replicating very well, sadly.
What's that?
But that research isn't replicating very well.
Oh, is it not?
Yeah,
Oh, no, I'll take it out.
unfortunately, lots of social research isn't replicating all that well. But that might be your next big thing if you actually do manage to get together sort of a learning database or a generative database of critiquing, because body language is important, and we don't have a mechanism to explain and clearly, put that out there, except for watching adults do things, and that's one of the social cultural markers that exist to keep people out of spaces that might benefit from having new people in them.
And body language is very different depending on cultures too.
I was
So
going to
some-
say.
Yes.
Yeah, something that we had to factor into body language because we measure hand gestures is culturally what that means. So Italians, for example, use their hands a lot. So for our other feedback,
No,
part
really?
of what we do is like a traffic light system. So it's like green is good, red is bad. But for body language, we can't do that because it does depend on where you're from. So an Italian, if they had a high hand gesture score, that would be a good thing, but somewhere else that might be a distracting thing. So we more just, in terms of that feedback, just give them like this was relatively high, and then explain why that may be a good or a bad thing, depending on where you're from, depending on the context. And there's a lot more to body language and, like as you say, like the cultural society norms of it than than you originally think there is.
I could see training of I'm about to go visit somebody in China and I don't know the customs and norms, and it says don't ever make that gesture. Or I think somebody was telling me you never ever want to put in Japan you never want to put your chopsticks into the rice, and just little things that I would never know.
Yeah, I remember I went to South Korea a couple of years ago, and they were saying that they still, even though they're really forward thinking, they still like a business card, but you have to give them the business card with two hands, not one hand. And
Yes.
and
Oh,
obviously,
yes,
little
yes.
things like
And you have to
that.
look at it, and yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
was taught that, but I never would have known it if someone hadn't pulled me aside and mentioned it.
Yes.
So this is super exciting stuff. I think you've somehow managed to do the amazing thing of being there right when VR's coming up and AI's coming out, and nobody ever gets that kind of lightning in a bottle, it seems like. Can you tell people listening where to go find more and download the app?
Yeah, so you can go onto our website, virtualspeech.com, and then if you've got a VR headset, you can go onto the Quest store. We're on the official Quest store, Pico store, HTC stores. We're available on all of them. Just search Virtual Speech as one word. And yeah, you'll find us there. But yeah, go to the website and then you can basically get a code that unlocks the content to go with the e-learning.
Oh,
And
this
that's
is super
where you
cool.
can do the role plays. But if you don't have a VR headset, you can also do all of that practice online. It's just not as immersive, obviously, because you're
Right.
not in 3D. But you can still get those feedback metrics.
Can I get the French version? Can I go download that right now?
Yeah, so if you download it and then when you go to role plays, on the left, if you click change language, you get French, Spanish, German, Italian, Portuguese, and English.
Wow, I'm gonna have to go grab it. I'm just excited because I think you're on the forefront of what I think learning could be very, very soon. Thank you for joining us, Sophie. Really exciting.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, great having you here.